In this video we're going to create this planet. I'll start by creating a Polygon Sphere. I'll hit 4 on the keyboard. If I hit W and I hold down X on the keyboard, I can snap it to the middle of the viewport. I'll begin by adding a texture to it. I'll right click and choose Assign New Material, Arnold, AI Standard Surface, and I'll name it, and I'll add the checkerboard pattern. And when I hit 6 on the keyboard, I would see something like this. Now I want these to be more squarish rather than these flattened out rectangle, so I'm going to go to UV, and in the UV editor there is our texture. I'll right click inside and choose UV Shell. I'll select the shell, and I'll hit R to get my scale tool. So the objective is to get these much squarer than they are. Very often I'll make it larger to begin with so I can see them a little bit easier, and then I'll go in and edit it so that down around the center of that sphere where the equator would be, the center, they are square. Once I have what I want there, I'll click and select from the center, and I'll scale it to fit inside the grid. I'm going to hit W on the keyboard and now move it outside though. We need to create the rings for the planet, and we want them to be all on one UV map when we're done. I'll right click and go back to my object mode. I'll go into my top view. I'm going to create a polygon torus. Holding down the space bar, I'll go to Create, Polygon Primitives, Torus. I'll click in the center and just drag out. Now whatever shape you have, once you click off on it, you'll see that it is in its object state. And if I were to go to the channel box with the attributes, under inputs you'll see section radius. If I click and drag with my left mouse, I can make it larger or smaller. I could change the size of it with the radius at the top. I'm going to add a little bit more geometry so it's a little rounder though. So under the subdivision axes, I'm going to make that 30. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to flatten the ring out a bit, because I'm going to edit it and bend it and make it a little bit more organic. Now we're going to have another ring, but let's put the texture on this as well so that we have it all on one UV map. So with the geometry selected, I'll click on the little blue ball that we see up here at the top of the user interface under the word Arnold, and when I click on it, I'll see in the upper left hand corner an AI standard with the name planet, and I'll just click and drag it with the middle mouse to the geometry. Now for this one we're going to use planar mapping though, so that the texture falls on the top. I'll click on Freeze Transforms, Delete by Type History, holding down my space bar in the center of my viewport. I'll go to UV, I'll choose planar, and I'll go to the attributes. I want to make sure that Y axis is selected, and then I'll click on Project. Now if I will go to my UV editor, there's my ring. Move that outside the quadrant where the checkerboard would be, and I'll start by scaling it down a bit. Now I want 2 of these rings. So in my object mode, in my viewport, I'll select and I'll hit Command D to duplicate that layer, and I'll just contract that new layer in a bit. I'm going to right click on the ring and choose UV Shell, and I'll select that ring, and when I drag out I've got 2. One representing the small, one representing the large. The one on the inside is here, and the one on the outside is here. Now it's going to be a little larger because it's the outside, so I'll just kind of put the shape like that. And I'm giving myself some space here so that when I go into Photoshop I've got a little room to not have to be so precise if I decide I want something different on each of these rings. Now I've got all my texture UVs created. I'll marquee select the 2 ring shapes. I'm going to put them over on the left. I'll drag the actual planet shape into the UV quadrant. I'll scale it a little bit more, and then I'll select both the rings and I'll scale them down and tuck them underneath. Now if I wanted to, I could always select one of these and I could move it off to the side, and that would give me just more latitude when I do my texture mapping. I'll return to the object mode for my geometry, and when I select them now, I go to the UV editor, image, UV snapshot. I've got it set for a PNG, and I'm going to make the size 1024 by 1024, and I'll browse and put it in my project folder. Once I've saved it and applied and closed, I can now go into Photoshop to put the texture on. I've opened my PNG in Photoshop, and I'll start by locking the transparency. Hitting D on the keyboard, I have the default. I'm just going to make the UV maps here a little darker. I can hit Option Delete or Alt Delete depending on your platform. I'll first start by adding a new layer. I'll put that new layer below layer 1, which is my UV map. I'm going to name that layer appropriately UV. And I'm going to click on the little padlock at the end of the lock tools here so that I don't destroy or move that UV map while I'm working on it. With that new layer selected, I'll pick a color and I'll fill it using the paint bucket by hitting G or Option Delete on the Mac or Alt Delete on your PC. And now I'll return to my layer window and add a new layer. I'll hit M on the keyboard to get my rectangle marquee, and I'm just going to go in and start to put some color bars across this planet. I'll go to my swatches, and once again I'll just pick a color. I'll put another layer in and make a narrower band. Returning to my swatches, I'll just pick another random color. And if I were to put this on my planet now, I wouldn't see it spin because this shape is completely consistent. So I'm going to get my brush, I'll make it hard, I'll get one more new layer, I'll pick a random color, and I'll just go in and paint a few dots. Now I'm going to put a design on the rings, and when we return, we'll apply it to our model in Maya. I've completed my texture map for my planet, so I'm going to turn off the UV map, and I'm going to save, and now I'm going to go into Maya.